The first thing I noticed was that Daniel did not look at me when he said it. He stood by the kitchen island, my kitchen island, the one I had paid $6,800 for at Home Depot in March of 2018, running his fingers over the marble countertop as if calculating its resale value. The recessed lights above him cast sharp shadows under his jaw. He had shaved too carefully that evening. Important conversations require a clean face, I suppose. Your father can't stay here anymore, he said. Not Mr. Whitaker. Not even George. Your father. My daughter, Melissa, sat at the dining table scrolling through her phone. The screen light reflected in her eyes. She did not look up. I was standing by the stove, stirring a pot of lentil soup. It was Wednesday, 6:40 p.m. I remember, because the 6 o'clock news had just ended, and the weatherman had promised rain by midnight. Can't stay, I repeated, turning the heat down to low. I wasn't aware I was visiting. Daniel exhaled sharply through his nose. That little impatient sound he makes when a contractor misses a deadline. We've talked about space, George. The house isn't working anymore. The house. 3 stories. 3,900 square feet. 4 bedrooms. A finished basement with Italian tile flooring. I selected myself. Total purchase price. $640,000 in August 2017. Down payment. $180,000. Mine. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. The fabric was thin from years of washing. I prefer old cotton. It doesn't pretend to be stronger than it is. And where exactly? Asked calmly. Am I supposed to go? Melissa finally looked up. Dad, don't make this harder than it needs to be. That phrase again. Harder than it needs to be. As if I had requested something unreasonable. Like oxygen. Daniel stepped closer to the table, resting his palms on the wood. We've been carrying the mortgage for 5 years. It's $4,200 a month. Property taxes went up again $18 for $100 this year. Utilities are insane. We just can't afford to support an extra adult. An extra adult. I nodded slowly. Remind me, I said, who wired the initial $180,000 on August 12, 2017? Was that you? His jaw tightened. And who paid the $220,000 renovation bill in 2019 when Melissa decided the kitchen felt dated? Melissa shifted in her chair. Dad. And who covered your business debt, Daniel? The $75,000 line of credit you defaulted on in February 2021? I have the transfer confirmation if your memory needs assistance. The only sound in the room was the gentle bubbling of lentils. Daniel straightened up. That was different. Different. Of course it was. I am 71 years old. I buried my wife, Eleanor, 6 years ago after 43 years of marriage. I sold the last of my manufacturing shares in 2016 for $2.3 million after taxes. I did not spend recklessly. I invested carefully. Municipal bonds. Conservative portfolios. No yachts. No second marriages. Just security. For my daughter. When Melissa married Daniel in 2015, he arrived with a charming smile and $112,000 in student loans. I paid them off as a wedding gift. I thought I was buying them freedom. Instead, I purchased entitlement. Dad, Melissa said softly, almost rehearsed, we need independence. You live in my house. It's in our names now, Daniel snapped. There it was. In 2018, my accountant suggested transferring the title to Melissa for estate planning purposes. Avoid probate. Reduce future tax exposure. There was a clause, small, neat, initialed by all parties, granting me lifetime residence rights. I remember signing it at 2:15 p.m., June 4th, 2018. I remember because Eleanor's birthday was the day before. I see, I said quietly. Daniel misread my tone as surrender. There's a condo complex near Pine Ridge, he continued. Senior friendly. Elevator access. About $1,600 a month. We can help you move next week. Help me move. From a house I paid for. Melissa reached across the table as if to touch my hand, but stopped halfway. It's just practical, Dad. You don't need all the space. All the space. I looked around the kitchen. The Viking range I chose because Eleanor loved to bake. The oak floors we had replaced after the flood in 2020, $34, $500, insurance deductible covered by me. The chandelier above the dining table that Melissa once said made her feel like royalty. I turned off the stove. When? I asked. Were you planning to tell me? Daniel glanced at Melissa. She avoided his eyes. We were going to talk this weekend, she murmured. Today was Wednesday. I see, I repeated. My voice surprised me. No shouting, no trembling, just clarity. The rain began tapping lightly against the windows. Daniel crossed his arms. We need an answer, George. We can't drag this out. I folded the dish towel carefully and placed it on the counter. You're right, I said. We shouldn't drag this out. Melissa looked relieved. Daniel almost smiled. Good, he said. So you'll start looking at places tomorrow? I met his eyes for the first time that evening. No, I said evenly. Tomorrow I'll be making a phone call. A flicker of irritation passed across his face. To who? To someone who reads contracts more carefully than you do. Silence fell, heavy and dense. Melissa stood abruptly. Dad, don't threaten us. I'm not threatening, I replied. I'm clarifying. Daniel laughed once, short and dismissive. You signed the house over. It's done. Perhaps. Perhaps not. At 8:12 p.m., I went upstairs to my bedroom. The master suite Eleanor designed with pale blue walls and French doors overlooking the backyard. I sat at my mahogany desk and opened the locked drawer. Inside lay a thin folder labeled Residence Agreement, June 4th, 2018. I ran my fingers over the embossed notary seal. Some people mistake kindness for weakness. Some mistake silence for surrender. And some forget that old men built the foundations they now stand on. Outside, the rain grew heavier. I dialed my attorney's number at 8:27 p.m. He answered on the third ring. Harold, I said calmly, I believe my children have misunderstood contract. And as I listened to his measured breathing on the other end of the line, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not grief, something colder. By morning, they would learn the difference between living in a house and owning it. If you believe older voices still matter, support this channel with a like and a subscription. Harold Whitmore has a habit of breathing slowly before he speaks. I could hear it through the phone at 8:27 p.m. A measured inhale, a quiet exhale, like a surgeon washing his hands before picking up a scalpel. George, he said finally, tell me exactly what they told you. I sat at Eleanor's old desk, the rain sliding down the window in thin silver lines. They informed me, I replied, that I am an extra adult, and that I should consider relocating to a senior-friendly condominium. Harold made a small sound in his throat. Not quite a laugh. Did they forget about Section 3.2? They seem to have misplaced it in their memory. Section 3.2. Lifetime right of residence. Irrevocable without written consent of the grantor. That would be me. They cannot remove you, Harold said calmly. Not legally. In fact, if they attempt to force you out, they're in breach. And there's another issue. What issue? The mortgage. I leaned back in the leather chair. The cushion sighed beneath me. The mortgage, Harold continued, was structured as a co-liability agreement. You are still the guarantor. If you withdraw financial support, the bank doesn't pursue you first. They pursue the titled owners. Daniel and Melissa. I closed my eyes briefly. How much do they owe? As of last quarter, $412,000 remaining principal. Adjustable rate. It reset in October. Of course it did. I thanked Harold and told him I would stop by his office at 9:30 a.m. He told me to bring every transfer record since 2017. I slept well that night. Strangely well. The kind of sleep that comes after a diagnosis, when the fear is replaced by certainty. At 7:00 a.m., I made coffee in the French press Eleanor bought in 2009. Dark roast, 2 spoons of sugar. Melissa always said I drank it too strong. Daniel came into the kitchen at 7:22, already dressed in a gray suit. He avoided my eyes. You thought about it? He asked, opening the refrigerator. Yes, I replied. And I've decided not to move. The refrigerator door paused mid-swing. You don't really have a choice. I stirred my coffee slowly. That's an interesting interpretation of contract law. Melissa entered at 7:25, hair still damp from the shower. She looked from him to me like a referee anticipating a foul. Dad, she began carefully. We don't want this to get ugly. Neither do I. Daniel shut The refrigerator harder than necessary. The glass jars rattled. You signed it over. The house is ours. I signed over title. I corrected. Not possession. He stared at me blankly. Melissa's face paled slightly. She remembered. I saw it flicker across her expression. The afternoon in the lawyer's office. The notary stamp, my careful insistence on the clause. You can't just threaten to pull funding, Daniel said, recovering. That's manipulative. I took a sip of coffee. In 2022, I said evenly, I transferred $96,000 to cover Ava's private school tuition. In 2023, I wired $38,500 to replace the HVAC system. Last February, I paid $22,000 in property tax arrears because you miscalculated. Daniel's jaw tightened. That was temporary. So is generosity, I replied. Melissa sat down heavily at the table. Dad, why are you doing this? I looked at her, really looked at her. 43 years old. The same brown eyes Eleanor had. The same stubborn chin. Because last night, I said quietly, your husband told me I don't belong in my own home. Silence. Ava, my granddaughter, wandered in at 7:31 with headphones around her neck. 17. Oblivious. Morning, Grandpa. Good morning, sweetheart. She poured cereal into a bowl. The ordinary sound of flakes hitting porcelain felt almost violent in its normalcy. Daniel lowered his voice. We'll discuss this later. No, I said calmly. We'll discuss it now. Ava looked up, sensing tension. You both seem to believe, I continued, that this house functions independently of my involvement. Let me clarify something. I stood slowly. My knees protested, but I did not rush. As of today, I will no longer be covering any financial obligations associated with this property. Melissa's spoon clattered onto the table. You can't mean that. I do. Daniel stepped closer. If you stop paying, we'll refinance. With what credit score? I asked mildly. Yours dropped to 612 last spring. His face flushed deep red. That's none of your business. It became my business when I covered your default. Ava stared between us, confused. What's happening? Melissa forced a smile. Nothing, honey. Just adult stuff. Yes, adult stuff, like contracts and consequences. Daniel leaned in close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive, synthetic. You're trying to scare us. No, I said softly. I'm preparing you. For what? For independence. The word hung between us like a blade. At 8:05 a.m., I picked up my briefcase, black leather, scuffed the corners, and walked to the front door. You're going to the lawyer, Melissa said, not a question. Yes. She stood abruptly. Dad, please, let's not turn this into a war. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. Wars, I said quietly, require aggression. I am simply enforcing boundaries. Daniel laughed again, but it lacked confidence this time. You won't do it. I looked at him steadily. At 9:45 a.m., Harold will notify the bank that I am withdrawing as guarantor effective immediately. At 10:15, he will file a notice affirming my lifetime residence rights. If necessary, we will pursue breach of agreement. Melissa's lips parted in disbelief. You'd sue your own daughter? I held her gaze. I would defend myself from anyone. The rain had stopped. The air outside smelled clean, almost sweet. As I stepped onto the porch, Daniel called after me. You need us, George. I turned slowly. No, I said. You needed me. And for the first time since Eleanor's funeral, I felt something close to balance returning. By noon, the bank would be aware. By 3, their confidence would begin to crack. And by tomorrow, they would understand that foundations do not beg the walls for permission to stand. Harold's office smells like old paper and lemon polish. It's on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown, above a travel agency that's been advertising Mediterranean cruises since 1998. I always found that ironic. People spend fortunes trying to escape their lives, while neglecting to protect them. At 9:28 a.m., I placed my folder on Harold's desk. He adjusted his glasses and began flipping through the documents. Transfer confirmations, wire receipts, tax statements. The paper made a soft, dry sound. Precise. Methodical. You were generous, he murmured. That's one word for it. He stopped at the mortgage agreement. They refinanced in 2021. Yes. Without informing me of the adjustable rate clause. He raised an eyebrow. And you continue paying. I assumed stability. He leaned back in his chair. George, when you transferred title in 2018, you retained a lifetime estate interest. That's ironclad. They cannot remove you. But here's where it gets interesting. I folded my hands in my lap. The mortgage is secured against the property under their names. You are secondary guarantor. If you formally withdraw support, the bank will demand proof of their independent capacity to service the debt. And if they cannot, foreclosure proceedings begin in 90 days. 90 days. I pictured Daniel's gray suit, his careful grooming, his confidence. I imagine him explaining foreclosure to the neighbors. Harold continued. You also have grounds to claim financial misrepresentation. Several transfers were made under the understanding of shared responsibility. How much leverage did that give me? He smiled faintly. Enough. At 10:14 a.m. He dictated a letter to the bank. At 10:32, he sent formal notice affirming my life estate rights. At 11:05, he began drafting a conditional demand for reimbursement. $189, $500 in documented overpayments since 2020. I watched his pen move across paper with quiet satisfaction. By noon, the machinery had started. When I returned home at 12:47 p.m., the house felt different. Still, charged. Daniel's car was in the driveway. He works remotely on Thursdays. I stepped inside to find him pacing the living room. Phone pressed to his ear. Yes, but he can't just... He stopped when he saw me. His expression shifted instantly. I'll call you back. He ended the call. You went through with it. Yes. He ran a hand through his hair. The bank called. Already? They said they need updated income verification. That seems reasonable. Melissa appeared from the hallway. Eyes red. She had been crying. Dad, why are you humiliating us? Humiliating. I am clarifying responsibility, I replied. Daniel stepped closer, anger radiating off him in waves. Do you understand what you've done? If they raise the rate or demand collateral, you might have to sell assets? I suggested mildly. The Tesla, perhaps? His face darkened. That's none of your concern. It became my concern when I financed his down payment. Melissa's voice trembled. We never meant to hurt you. No, I said evenly. You meant to remove me. Silence fell between us like dust. Ava's bedroom door opened upstairs. Music drifted faintly, something rhythmic and detached from consequence. Daniel lowered his voice. You're being vindictive. I considered that. Vindictive would be filing for immediate eviction under breach of residence clause. I said calmly. I have not done that. Melissa stared at me. Eviction. Yes. The word landed heavily. Harold had explained it in clinical detail. If they interfered with my right of residence through coercion, intimidation, or attempted displacement, I could petition the court for sole occupancy enforcement. Daniel laughed nervously. You wouldn't. Wouldn't I? He looked at Melissa, searching for solidarity. She found none. You think this house stands because of you? He snapped suddenly. I know it does. The words came sharper than intended. Years of restraint compressed into a single sentence. In 2017, when your startup collapsed, who absorbed the $75,000 debt? In 2020, when you missed 6 mortgage payments during the market correction, who wired $24,600 to prevent default? When property taxes increased 14% last year, who covered the shortfall? Daniel said nothing. You mistook my support for obligation, I continued quietly. That was your error. Melissa sank onto the couch, covering her face. What do you want, Dad? An honest question. I want acknowledgement, I said after a moment. And security. Daniel scoffed. Security? You're worth millions. And yet, I replied softly, you try to make me homeless. The room went still. At 3:18 p.m., the mail arrived. Daniel retrieved it. His hands shook slightly as he opened a certified envelope. He read silently. Then again. What is it? Melissa whispered. He handed her the paper. Her eyes widened. It's a notice, she said faintly. Of what? Daniel demanded. Affirmation of life estate and prohibition of interference. He looked at me, as though seeing me for the first time. You're serious? Yes. And if we don't comply? I met his gaze steadily. Then the court will decide who stays. A long, terrible silence followed. My house, felt patient, like it had been waiting for this reckoning. Daniel's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen and swore under his breath. The bank, he muttered. He stepped outside to answer. Through the window, I watched his posture change. Shoulders tense, head bowed slightly, the arrogance thinning. Melissa looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. Dad, she whispered, please don't destroy us. I studied her face. The child who once clung to my leg at kindergarten drop-off. The woman who had forgotten. I am not destroying you, I said quietly. I am removing myself from being destroyed. Outside, Daniel's voice rose, strained and sharp. Inside, the house stood firm. And for the first time since he said those words, your father can't stay here. I understood something with absolute clarity. They had confused possession with power, and they were about to learn the difference. The sheriff arrived on a Tuesday. It was 10:12 a.m. I remember because I had just finished buttering toast, real butter, not the low-fat substitute Melissa insists on buying. And I was reading the financial section. The adjustable rate had, predictably, increased another 0.5%. The knock was firm, professional. Daniel was home. He had taken the week off, citing strategic restructuring. In truth, the bank had frozen their credit line the day before. Melissa opened the door. Can I help you? Her voice carried that brittle politeness people use when they sense trouble. Ma'am, I'm Deputy Collins. Papers rustled. I have a court order to serve. Daniel appeared beside her almost instantly. What is this about? The deputy stepped inside the threshold, but did not remove his hat. Respectful, detached. Enforcement of residence rights and temporary exclusive occupancy. Melissa blinked. Exclusive occupancy. My name was printed in bold across the top of the document. George Whitaker. Daniel grabbed the paper from the deputy's hand. His eyes moved rapidly across the page. I watched the color drain from his face line by line. This is ridiculous, he snapped. He can't do this. I took a slow bite of toast. I can, I said evenly. The deputy continued in a calm, rehearsed tone. The court has determined that interference with the plaintiff's life estate has occurred, effective immediately. The titled owners are to vacate the premises within 72 hours, pending further review. 72 hours. Melissa made a small, broken sound in her throat. This is our home, she whispered. The deputy did not argue. He simply extended a second sheet of paper. If you have objections, they can be filed through your attorney. Daniel turned to me, fury blazing openly now. You went to court without telling us? You told me to leave without telling me, I replied. That's not the same thing. No, I agreed softly. It isn't. Ava's bedroom door opened upstairs. She descended slowly, eyes wide. What's happening? Melissa turned toward her daughter, panic flashing. Go back upstairs. No, Ava said, glancing at the uniformed officer. What's going on? The deputy cleared his throat. This is a civil matter, ma'am. Daniel's voice cracked as he addressed me. You're humiliating us in front of our daughter. I set the toast down carefully on the plate. You humiliated me first, I said quietly. You just didn't think it counted. The house felt unnaturally still, as if listening. Daniel ran both hands through his hair. We'll fight this. You're welcome to. Melissa stepped toward me, tears spilling freely now. Dad, please. We said things we didn't mean. I looked at her steadily. You said I didn't belong. She flinched. The deputy handed Daniel a final notice. You have 72 hours. I'll return Friday at noon to confirm compliance. He nodded politely at me. Sir. Then he left. The door closed with a sound that seemed to echo through every room. Daniel stood frozen, the court papers trembling slightly in his grip. This is insane, he muttered. We have rights. You have title, I corrected. Not immunity. Melissa sank into a chair at the dining table. The same table where, 6 nights earlier, they had calmly planned my relocation. Ava looked between us, confusion giving way to understanding. You tried to kick Grandpa out? She asked slowly. Daniel opened his mouth. No sound came. Melissa whispered it wasn't like that. It sounds exactly like that, Eva replied. Silence thickened the air. I rose from my chair and walked toward the living room. The Persian rug beneath my feet cost $12,000. Eleanor chose it after weeks of deliberation. I remembered her laughing when the delivery men struggled to unroll it. I just wanted something that would last, she had said. I turned back to face them. I am not asking for vengeance, I said calmly. You may return once this matter is resolved legally, but you will not threaten my residence again. Daniel's pride finally cracked. Where are we supposed to go? He demanded. The irony was almost poetic. There's a condo complex near Pine Ridge, I said quietly. Senior friendly. His eyes widened in disbelief. Melissa began to cry harder. This is cruelty, she whispered. No, I replied. Cruelty is telling a 71-year-old widower he's an extra adult. Eva stepped closer to me. Grandpa, are you really making them leave? I am enforcing an agreement. She nodded slowly, absorbing it. Daniel threw the papers onto the table. This will destroy us financially. I tilted my head slightly. Perhaps you should have considered that before attempting to destroy me emotionally. He stared at me as though seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. At 11:03 a.m., Daniel's phone rang again. The bank. He hesitated before answering. Yes, he said tightly. I received the updated rate. Pause. No, we don't have alternate collateral. Longer pause. I watched his shoulders slump inch by inch. Inside that silence, I felt no joy, no triumph, just equilibrium. Melissa looked up at me through tear-blurred eyes. Dad, she whispered. How did it come to this? I held her gaze. It came to this, I said softly, the moment you believed I was disposable. The clock above the fireplace ticked steadily. Tuesday, 72 hours. The house did not tremble, and neither did I. They left on Friday at 11:43 a.m., not noon, as the court order required .1143. Daniel has always preferred leaving before a deadline, as if arriving early somehow preserves dignity. A rented U-Haul truck stood in the driveway where his Tesla used to gleam. The Tesla had been sold 2 days earlier. I saw the listing online myself. Excellent condition. Low mileage. One owner. He did not mention that the down payment came from a 70-year-old man he had tried to displace. Melissa moved quietly through the house, packing framed photographs into cardboard boxes. She avoided my eyes. Eva carried her own suitcase to the truck without speaking. The deputy arrived at 12:01 p.m., punctual and indifferent. He nodded at me once, surveyed the scene, and marked compliance on his clipboard. Daniel signed a document with a stiff hand. This isn't over, he muttered as he passed me. I looked at him calmly. No, I said. It's not. The truck door slammed. The engine started. The sound faded down the street. Silence returned. The house exhaled. For a long time, I stood in the foyer. The chandelier above me flickered slightly, an electrical quirk I've meant to repair. Dust motes floated in the afternoon light. The house did not feel empty. It felt reclaimed. I walked slowly through each room. The kitchen island still bore faint scratches from Daniel's laptop. The dining table had a water ring from last Thanksgiving. Melissa forgot to use a coaster. Upstairs, Ava's room smelled faintly of lavender detergent and teenage perfume. In the master suite, Eleanor's photograph rested on the nightstand. I didn't turn it down, I told her quietly. Just defended it. At 2:30 p.m., Harold called. They've requested mediation, he said. That was quick. They're financially strained. The bank accelerated the review process once they saw the occupancy order. How long? If they cannot refinance within 30 days, foreclosure becomes likely. I leaned against the window, looking out at the oak tree Eleanor planted in 2001. And what do they want for mediation? To negotiate shared occupancy, possibly repayment terms. Repayment. I had prepared the spreadsheet myself. $189,500 in overpayments. Itemized, dated, documented. Set the meeting, I said. Mediation took place the following Wednesday at 3:00 p.m. neutral office. Beige walls. Water pitcher sweating onto a paper coaster. Melissa looked smaller without the house behind her. Daniel looked tired. Their attorney, a young man with an expensive watch, spoke first. My clients are prepared to acknowledge Mr. Whitaker's life estate and reimburse a portion of documented contributions. A portion? Harold asked mildly. Daniel shifted in his chair. We can manage $60,000 over time. I almost smiled. In 2021 alone, I said calmly, I covered $98,600 in direct payments. Melissa's eyes filled again. We were overwhelmed, she whispered. We didn't think. That's correct, I replied. You didn't. The mediator cleared her throat gently. Perhaps we can focus on resolution. I placed a single sheet of paper on the table. A proposal. I had drafted it the night before at 11:17 p.m. Transfer of full title back to me. Immediate vacating of property confirmed. Waiver of reimbursement in exchange for release from foreclosure liability. Daniel read it once. Then again. You want the house back. I never relinquished it, I corrected. Melissa looked at him. We can't fight foreclosure, she said softly. Not without him. Daniel's pride battled visibly with mathematics. Numbers always win. At 4:12 p.m., he signed. Melissa followed. Harold slid the documents toward me. My pen hovered for a moment over the line. Eleanor's name echoed faintly in my memory. I signed. 3 weeks later, the title was restored. The mortgage was restructured under my name alone. Fixed rate, conservative terms. I paid the remaining principal $412,000 without ceremony. The bank manager shook my hand as though I had rescued him personally. In a way I had. Melissa called once a month later. Dad, she said carefully, we found a rental. I'm glad. There was a pause. I'm sorry. The word sounded fragile. Unpracticed. I know, I replied. Another pause. Can we visit sometime? I looked around the living room. The rug, the chandelier, the quiet. Yes, I said after a moment. As guests. She inhaled sharply, then exhaled. That's fair. After we hung up, I walked to the backyard. The oak tree cast a wide shadow across the lawn. The air smelled of cut grass and late summer. Some lessons are expensive. Some cost money. Others cost pride. Daniel believed ownership was printed on paper. He learned it is written in foundations. As the sun dipped lower behind the fence, the house stood steady and silent around me. And for the first time since Eleanor died, I did not feel like an extra adult in my own life. I felt exactly where I belonged.